Good evening and welcome to the Kaufman Corner podcast. With you, as always, the good doctor, Rany Jazayerli, of course, co-founder of Baseball Prospectus. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. You can catch my radio show 2 to 6 p. Central Time at 810WHB.com. And nothing has happened. Literally nothing has happened. It's been 8 days since we last talked, and nothing has happened with the Kansas City Royals. But is that even a bad thing? I don't know. We're going to talk about it tonight. We're also going to play some fact or fiction. I put it out there on the Twitter dealing with Bobby Witt, Scott Barlow, Vinnie Pasquantino, Asa Lacy, Zack Greinke, maybe even Brady Singer for sure. The Royals bats. We'll get into all that. Plus, we want to break down the managerial candidates that we know of. We can confirm 3 that we know of interviewed. At least there have been reports about the interviewing going on. That's Pedro Grifol, Matt Quatraro, and Dusty Wathan, and also talk of Vance Wilson would be interviewed. We've seen no one report that he has been interviewed at this point. Rany, first of all, let's just start with this part of the equation. Is all quiet? Is no news good news? Is no news bad news? Or is it just no news?
No news at this point is no news. It's the postseason. Teams are generally reluctant to make waves during the postseason. There used to actually be a moratorium from the commissioner's office. You couldn't announce manager hirings and firings in the middle of playoff games. I think that was put in because George Steinbrenner would purposely fire or hire a manager right in the middle of the playoffs in order to bring the sports pages back to the Yankees, and that they had to put up a kibosh on that. So a couple of teams, I think what's notable is a couple of teams have made, some managerial news. The Rangers have hired Bruce Bochy to be their new manager. And I think Bruce Bochy might be a good candidate for that job, as he's an older manager, but had a tremendous amount of success with the Giants. And I think, you see Dusty Baker obviously taking the Astros to the World Series. There's something to be said for the steady hand of a veteran manager to go along with all the analytics that are going on, in theory, at least behind the scenes. But I don't think he would have been a good fit for the Royals. I think the Royals are looking for a young, fresh face. You want to, they want to go in a different direction. So I think the biggest news is simply that they have not hired someone yet.
Okay. I'll push back just a little bit on I think a good manager is a good manager. I don't think the idea that the guy needs to not have gray hair. And I used to say this when I was young, so now please don't think it's just because I'm an old fart. But I think there's something to be said for having a veteran guy that's been around the block and has been there and done that. I listen. I think Bochy was a tremendous manager with the Giants. But that being said, I can see a scenario where he wouldn't be the right fit here. But I will push back a little bit on the idea that like getting some young guy in here, like why? What does that?
Well,
do?
This might be my bias speaking, but it would.
Let me ask you this: is he going to do up downs with the team like Dan Campbell did with the Detroit Lions in Hard Knocks? Because that had everybody bubbling, and so far it's amounted to diddly poo. For the Detroit Lions. Like why do you like the fresh face? Let me ask you that first.
If the Royals are biting kneecaps in spring training, I will worry. But I will say one thing in Dan Campbell's defense, I'll just say 2 words: Detroit Lions. Mm-hmm. I don't have to say anything more. Okay. But
Ford family.
Yes, exactly. So yes, maybe this is my bias showing a little bit. It's not that I would be averse to having a veteran manager. I think you could make a very strong argument that in the modern landscape of baseball, where analytics have sort of, occupy a place in every organization, precisely because every team is looking at data in roughly the same way. Some teams rely on it certainly more than others, but because they're all looking at it, the inefficiency is not to be found there. There isn't as much of an advantage that comes from being a heavily quantitatively focused team. And so the advantage might actually be on the other side, where the manager is somebody who can handle personalities and be a good motivator, et cetera, et cetera. The key is to find a manager who is willing to do all of that and at the same time rely on the analytics side. In other words, can you teach an old dog new tricks? And I think, it's important to bring up Dusty Baker here because I can think of few managers in my lifetime who have made that adjustment. I mean, when I think of Dusty Baker, I still think of the 2003 Chicago Cubs, where he just obliterated the arms of Mark Pryor and Kerry Wood down the stretch, which not only, destroyed their careers in the long term. Mark Pryor was, essentially used up by the time he was 25, 26 years old, but also probably had something to do with them not pitching very well down the stretch in the playoffs that year. And the big meltdown in Game 6, everyone talks about the fan in the stands, whose name I won't mention, but the reality is Mark Pryor lost his stuff in the 8th inning, probably exhausted. And yet, the Dusty Baker of today, the game has changed so much that literally no team in baseball would come close to using a pitcher the way that Dusty Baker did back then. He has adjusted along with the game. The things that he did poorly, he has stopped doing. But the things that he does well, running a clubhouse, getting all the players on the same page, that is still there. And, I'm very happy for him personally that he's going to the World Series again. So certainly there is value in having an older manager. To me, my bias is simply that if the Royals were to hire a young, data savvy, I don't want to say new school manager, but somebody who actually looks at the data not as simply a eye candy just to get the media off his back, but actually values it as something that can help a team win. It would literally be the first time in the history of the organization. I want to see that. It would be without precedent in my history as a Royals fan.
Do we know Bochy's not? Like I said, I assume that there was kind of either he just needed to recharge his batteries, or Andy Reid could clearly still coach after 2012.
Sure.
When he left the Philadelphia Eagles, he said, I interviewed him when he first came to town. Hey, they needed a new voice and I needed a new challenge, right? And it could have been that simple for Bochy. Do we know Bochy, is he not analytically driven? He's not coming, but I don't want to spend much time on him. But I was always impressed by Bruce Bochy as a manager.
And he might be. I don't know. And look, if he never manages another game, he's going into the Hall of Fame. 3 world championships. I think there's pretty much a hard and fast rule. You win 3 World Series as a manager, you're going to go to the Hall of Fame one day. Him and Dusty Baker, I think, especially if Dusty wins the World Series this year, I think both of those guys are. So maybe, but the fact that the Giants moved on from around the time they brought in a analytically savvy general manager in Farhan Zaidi, he's probably not as on board as some of the guys who grew up in the culture of that. And what I find interesting is that both of the guys that the Royals have interviewed from outside the organization have a reputation to varying degrees of blending both the personnel expertise of handling personalities in a clubhouse with valuing data, valuing the data guys in the organization, and trying to blend the two. And so that's what excites me about what we've heard so far in this manager search.
Let's start with it. Pedro Grifol, window dressing or really a candidate for the Royals?
I honestly think it's window dressing in the sense that I would be very surprised if they hire him. I don't think it's window dressing in the sense that he's not in potentially excellent manager candidate, and we know that he's been interviewed by other organizations, so people think highly of him. I just think that he's the wrong. This is the wrong place and the wrong time for an organization to go within itself for its next manager. The Royals need to show that they are making a clean break. It's not Pedro's fault, but they need to show they're making a clean break from the Dayton Moore era. And I can think of no worse way to do that than to hire a manager from within a month after you hired your new general manager, new leader of baseball operations from within.
Yeah, I'm with you. And listen, if the only way I think you can instill confidence in the fans, and I do think that the fans are maybe more the fans' opinion, it's maybe more of a bigger deal than people may realize, is because they're trying to get a stadium built. And so I don't think you want to do anything, standing there and continuing with Cal Eldred for 3 more years in the midst of votes coming. No. And hiring an unpopular manager. No. I do think it has to be part of the consideration because the bigger and greater overall good of the organization was making sure that the stadium gets done and gets done right. So I think that's
It's funny because normally you do not want to make decisions based on what's going to make the fan base happy, but the Royals are actually, I think, given their recent history, listening to the fans and like common sense might actually be an improvement on, the stubborn refusal to listen to what the fans are clamoring for has kind of put them in this predicament in the first place. I don't think it's a bad thing if they at least take into account that, gee, the fans aren't going to react well to this, because the fans might actually have a point in this case.
yeah. By the way, I will tell Matt this. I'll make this statement. I don't know if I've made it on my radio show or not. If it's not just east of downtown, I will fall out of my chair. Like connecting the east side with downtown, I will fall out of my chair. Matt's asking where the stadium might go. I've been doing some work on that. That's where I think it's going to end up, FYI. And I think that's an important, where it ends up ultimately. And that can always go sour. It's not done. It's not being built, but I think they want it sooner rather than later. And that's why I bring up, I think it's important to get the hire right. And if the fans are going to be like, hey, Pedro Grifol's been here and been a part of the equation, I don't know how you could hire him and have him not at some point make it crystal clear he did not agree with what was going on. And even that presents a problem with like, well, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you do something about it? So I just think it's too tricky, too fine a needle to thread to go with Pedro Grifol. And I think they will come to that conclusion as well. I'm very happy he's had 2 interviews down with the Marlins. I would love to see him get the Marlins job. I would love to see Pedro Grifol be a manager in baseball. I think he can be very successful. I just don't think this is the right spot or the right time.
I think we're in agreement on that.
All right, Matt Quatraro. What are your thoughts on the Rays? Matt Quatraro, who had time in Cleveland when John Sherman was a minority owner. He was on the hitting side of the equation at the big league level then. What do you think of Matt Quatraro?
So based on what we've been hearing, even when before the interview process began and the Royals fired Mike Matheny and the first list of 20 or 25 possible managerial candidates was released, his name was the most interesting one on the list to me. And to me, he would still be my number one choice based on what I know, which admittedly, I've never met these people in the flesh. And I'm basing this as much on the resume as anything else. But his resume, like I said, working with the Guardians and now working with the Rays, you're talking about 2 of the best dollar for dollar organizations in the sport. And perhaps even more importantly, 2 of the organizations that have figured out the art of pitcher development and doing that. Is, I mean, the number one issue for the Royals right now is pitcher development, and you're bringing in a manager who has experience not just with like seeing those pitchers develop, but also has expectations that like you can actually take a 15th round reliever that nobody else wants, but the metrics, like so much of what the Rays have done with their bullpen is finding unwanted guys because they don't maybe throw particularly hard, but there's stuff in their data about the movement of their pitches, and getting those guys into their organization and then making them throw those secondary pitches a lot more. So much of baseball today is not simply getting a guy to throw a new slider. It's recognizing that he has a great slider. He just doesn't throw it enough. He has a great changeup. And the Rays do that as well as any organization in baseball. So the fact that he has experience with 2 organizations that have gotten the most out of pitchers using data, I think is a perfect fit for an organization that hasn't been using data, hasn't been developing pitchers, but actually I think has a fair amount of pitching talent within the organization. I think he would complement both the strengths and the weaknesses of the Royals at this point in time. And while he does have that connection with Cleveland, and so maybe there's an edge there when it comes to John Sherman, that's the only connection that would make you say, well, they're only hiring this guy because he's a friend. Because this is not a connection hire. This is a resume hire, and I think that's something the Royals desperately need. Mike Matheny was a connection hire, and didn't work out. I really think they should just hire a guy based on the quality of his work, not on who he happens to know.
I think Mike Matheny was also hired on the idea that, the manager, I mean, he was hired like it was 1990 something, even though Mike Matheny, I think, was advancing with the data and the metrics and doing his homework. And as we pointed out, you could tell in certain things that he was doing as far as lineup construction and or batting order construction and how he'd use his pitching staff, that he was in tune to it. I don't think they were in tune to it upstairs, so I don't think it really mattered.
Well, the irony to me is that he actually, like you said, he did come along with the data a fair amount. The problem was he never had the clubhouse management skills of the Dusty Bakers, the Bruce Boshis. I mean, part of why he got fired in St. Louis was because the players had turned on him, and by the end that was starting to grate. I think he was starting to grate on the players in the Royals clubhouse as well. So that's the irony. I give him credit that he did try to come along with the times from a data perspective, but that wasn't his only weakness.
Yeah, I listen, and I agree, and I think I personally think the man never had a shot, no chance. Like the organization, they weren't going to have enough talent for him to succeed, and I don't think that they were. I don't think they've been. I still don't think they've been drafting the right way. And we're going to get to that a little bit with our fact and fiction here in a minute. I still think that there are big issues, and I'll point out a couple of the issues that are there. So I don't think he ever had a chance. So I think I don't even.
Well, of all the things that I thought would get him fired, honestly, the thing that I think got him fired more than anything else was his loyalty to Cal Eldred, frankly.
Oh,
I think that, it's like, but it's funny because when he was hired, I was terrified that he was behind the times from an analytics perspective. I was terrified that he would lose the clubhouse. Those two weren't the disaster I feared, but ultimately his loyalty to an incompetent pitching coach mattered more than anything else. And while, yes, I think it would have been hard for him to succeed regardless, that was the nail in the coffin. That was self-inflicted. He could have called for a new pitching coach at some point in the last 3 years, and he did not.
I do. I think this is an interesting question here. If you hire Quatraro, do you think he brings pitching coaches with him to the staff? I mean, that's one of them. Yes. You expect him to know either people that have come through and around the organization that are still there, that are out of contract or can be offered a superior job and get there, but also people that he's been through in and around those two systems. You've got, it's what Rany said, two different teams that think the way the Royals want to think. And having been around that, he's been around a lot of people that are in various places that he could draw upon to go hire and be part of the conversation to help build out the front office and the coaching staff and everything like that. So if they hire Quatraro, I'm thrilled, right? I'd say, okay, they're going after a guy who's, been around organizations that know what to do. I don't know as much about what Dusty Wathan's background is, other than to say that the Philadelphia Phillies are in the World Series. They've interviewed him for their manager job. He didn't get it, but they liked him so much that he has stayed on through two different managers. He's on his third manager coaching on the big league staff, which speaks to his relatability with the players. He clearly, and as you pointed out, with Mike Matheny, he wasn't wearing out his welcome with the players. And it speaks to the fact that he was hip to how they were doing things. And I would, if you were to pick a favorite right now, I would pick Dusty Wathan because, and I'll go back to something you said about, well, there's kind of a moratorium, don't hire anybody. I really hope that's not why the Royals haven't made a move, because they've been the good, loyal soldier for Major League Baseball. And every time they do, they suck. They're a bad organization. When David Glass wouldn't overpay anyone in Latin America and wouldn't pay anything over slot money and was doing everything Bud Selig wanted all the owners to do, they were god awful, right? So I really hope that they're like, look, when we find our guy, we're going to put him out there, because the Rangers clearly didn't care about that. And I don't think the Royals should. They need to do what's best for their organization. And the Phillies and Astros and Major League Baseball can eat it. Like, that's what I think needs to happen. I tend to think the reason we haven't heard anything is that Dusty Wathan's probably the favorite, and they're waiting for him to be done coaching so that they can have the press conference.
Yeah, I don't, certainly after the Rangers made their move, there's no moratorium on the Royals making it. If they've decided they should hire, especially because Matt Quatraro is, I think, one of the front runners for the Miami job as well. Like, if they want, like, I am a little worried that the reason that the longer this goes without them making an announcement is, the more likely it is that it's not Quatraro, because they're risking losing him to another organization. I have not, I'm not as certain that Dusty Wathan is in that position, but even if he is, like you said, he is in the postseason right now, so I don't think another team's going to be able to hire him out from under the Royals necessarily. And what I've heard about Dusty Wathan, good things. And my concern with Dusty Wathan has very little to do with, a little bit to do with his track record, which is impressive, but it doesn't check off all the boxes that
Okay.
Quatraro does. Some of the other people, Joe Espada, was rumored to be getting the White Sox job potentially. In fact, I think was actually reported by one outlet that he got the job. And then we started hearing that, oh no, Jerry Reinsdorf wants Ozzie Guillen back because the last time he forced his GM to hire a veteran manager, that went so well. Whatever else we can say, I'm thankful that John Sherman is not Jerry Reinsdorf.
Right.
But Joe Espada, for instance, bench coach for the Houston Astros. We talk about teams again that have done an incredible job of developing pitching. The Phillies really aren't on that list. That doesn't necessarily mean Dusty Wathan's a bad choice. But if he is,
let's examine that. Is it? I mean, we're gonna want to and I think after you have the press conference, all fan bases buy in because they have no choice. That's the guy, and he's not getting fired in a week. So you start looking for a reason to buy in. That is I've watched it for however long. What am I at? Almost 30 years, watching hirings and firings come, and it's like clockwork. Even if they don't like it initially. Give it 3 weeks later or after having had a pissing match with one of their buddies who roots for a different team, they will have found a way to defend their guy because he's their guy. And so that will happen no matter who they hire. But while Dusty Wathan is not here, it is the hiring of Dusty Wathan same old, because he was not a pitcher. He doesn't have a pitching background. You mentioned the Phillies aren't exactly, world beaters when it comes to developing pitching. Should we be worried that Dusty Wathan is just keeping the band together?
A little bit. And here's the thing: like he could turn out to be great. If they hire him, I'm not going to make a judgment on him for a long time. I want to see what we get, and certainly he may have the skill set. It's not. This isn't a Mike Matheny. This would be a perfectly solid hiring. I just feel there's a lot more risk. But my concern is if they hire him, how much of the fact that you're going to win the news cycle in Kansas City with Dusty Wathan more than with Matt Quatraro. Nobody knows who Matt Quatraro is. Nobody knows how to pronounce his name. Dusty Wathan is the son of John Wathan. Mm-hmm. And I should point out, I think John Wathan, I thought very highly of John Wathan as manager of the Kansas City Royals. I'm old enough to remember him. And I would make the argument that he is the third best manager in Royals history after only Whitey Herzog and Dick Hauser. I would put him above Ned Yost. Ned Yost, yes, has the title and won't take that away from him. But John Wathan kind of came into a very difficult, almost impossible situation when he took over as manager. I mean, this is 1986. Dick Hauser is diagnosed with brain cancer just a year after winning the World Series. A really tragic situation. The Royals had an interim manager for a while, and then in 1987, the team was not surprisingly underachieving. They fired, I think it was Billy Gardner was the manager. They were under 500 late in the year. John Wathan, who was he might have still been active as a player, or he was just about finishing his career at that point. Like he was very young. He was like 36 years old. I'm actually looking out. He had retired 2 years earlier. But I mean, he had been teammates with with George Brett and some of the other guys on that team. A difficult situation for a manager to come into when you're some of the players you're supposed to be above are actually think of you as a peer. And yet he did a great job. The Royals almost snuck into the postseason after he was hired. 2 years later, the 1989 Royals won 92 games, which was better record than the 2014 Royals. And in today's modern playoff setup, they absolutely would have been a playoff team. And then he got basically fired because he started the 1991 season 15-22, which nowadays would be basically like par for the course, but like Royals had higher standards back then. But was a very impressive technical manager. I think highly of John Wathan to the degree that influences the decision. This is certainly not me looking at Dusty Wathan through the prism of, I didn't have a good experience with his father. His dad was a long-term Royals player, manager. He just retired a month ago, I think. I know John's daughter, Dusty's sister, Dina, worked in the Royals front office and community relations, I believe, for many, many years. And
She's who we get our press pass from when we go out to spring training.
And I've had a few indirect interactions with her, and she's great. So the Wathans are sort of royal, they're family. But
and I won't hate it. I'm with you,
right.
but I think
I just don't want
you
don't want to hire somebody because they're family. If he's the best guy for the job, I'm on board. And if they hire him, I will give him every opportunity to prove that he's the best guy for the job. I think he checks off more boxes than some of the other guys. I think of the retreads of years past, Tony Pena, Buddy Bell. You go back to Tony Muse or whatever. Like I certainly would put him at a higher level than some of the guys the Royals have hired in the past. But I just look at Matt Quatraro's resume and I'm like, I need a good reason not to hire this guy, and I'm not sure I've seen that yet.
Yeah. I want, and I think this is of note. Matt's had a couple good points. He's at 15 and 22 after both 89 Cy Young Award winners.
Basically, Mark Davis got John Wathan fired, and Mark Davis got no better after John Wathan was fired. Right. So that wasn't on John Wathan. That was Mark Davis being just a horrible free agent signing.
I think this is a good one too. Matt said, "Is the Royals' job a better job than the Marlins?" And I think it is.
I think it is too.
We don't have a long track record of John Sherman, but he came from Cleveland and was of that mindset. And I think if you're a manager, the stability in Kansas City appears like it's going to be a more stable operation. And he comes from an organization, as we've said, that has a pedigree of winning. I think the Royals job, and you're managing in the American League Central, as opposed to the National League East, where you have murderers row that you've got to go up against. Yes, I do think the Royals job is a better job.
And look, fair or not, the Marlins as a franchise have salted the earth with that fan base for the last 25 years and made promises that they had no intention of keeping. New owners have come in, and maybe things will be better. But frankly, if I'm a managerial candidate, I'm not sure I trust what I hear from the Marlins. There's still a lot of front office turnover that's been going on there. Derek Jeter is, no longer associated with ownership. All right. Kim Ng has been the GM there for a year or two now, and she's already on slightly unstable ground. Whereas with the Royals, yes, Dayton Moore just got fired, but JJ Piccolo is, he's new to the job. He's going to get at least we've talked about this. He doesn't have the leash that a typical new GM would have, but he probably has a longer leash right now than Kim Ng does. So, there are jobs out there that might be more appealing to the Royals, but the Marlins to me is not one of them.
Yeah, no, I would tend to agree. All right. So at the end of the day, if it's these three candidates, you're hiring who?
I think Matt Quatraro sounds, I would be thrilled, not just because of the resume, but also because it is like a sign of the Royals breaking from their past, hiring somebody that, yes, is unproven, but has the hallmarks of, a guy who 10 years from now might be considered one of the brightest young, maybe 5 years from now, one of the brightest young managers in the sport, a guy who can meld the data side, the player management side, and the pitching development side. And that is such a key ingredient for this organization.
Yeah, I agree. I think Quatraro would be the choice. And I think the Royals have to know that. I will say this, that if Dusty Wathan is hired, I think he's been hired for the right reasons, because they will know. They will have sat. I'm sure John Sherman will say, we're not just hiring him because, he's in the family. So I will not mind if Dusty Wathan is hired. I will certainly give him his first shot. But I think the better resume for what the Royals have stated on what they're wanting to do is Quatraro. And off the candidates that we have right now, I think that's the direction it should go. Let's turn our attention. Let's play a little fact or fiction with some of the players and situations on the roster. I want to start with this. When you go to Baseball References page for the Kansas City Royals, they do, and most people that are listening to this would be familiar with this. They have in each season for the franchise, they have the all-time franchise WAR leaders. I'll list it across. I think it might be 24 guys that go across the top. When you do in an individual season, they have the top 12. Here are the Royals' WAR leaders for this year. Brady Singer, 4.5. Michael A. Taylor, 3.2. Scott Barlow, 2.8. Salvador Perez, 2.7. Andrew Benintendi, 2.5. Zack Greinke, 2.5. Dylan Coleman, 1.6. Vinnie Pasquantino, 1.5. Nate Eaton, 1.0. And then tied for 10th, or I'm assuming won by percentage points over Michael Massey because they list him as 10th, Bobby Witt Jr. with a 0.9 WAR. So I will pose this question. If you put him, by the way, up against the Astros, he would come in 18th on their roster. The season that he had would be 18th in WAR. So while he had a fantastic year, we haven't had the Rookie of the Year voting come out. I saw Jason Stark had him 5th on his list. He was one of the best rookies in baseball this year. 18th on the American League representative in the World Series. He's got a long way to go. 10th on his own team. Bobby Witt Jr. will rank in the top 3 in WAR for the Kansas City Royals next year. True or false, Randy?
I was you beat me to adding this question to the list. I was going to add it, but I wasn't actually going to make it top 3. I was going to say top 1. Will Bobby Witt be the best player on the Royals next year?
No chance.
I certainly think
no chance.
I think top 3, fact. And look, because that's not. It's easy for me to say that because it's not me. I don't even have to be that bullish on Bobby Witt. That could also just be being bearish on the rest of the organization. You're comparing him to the other Royals. The main reason, though, is that one of the single biggest reason why his WAR total is as low as it is because his defensive metrics were horrific. If he were a league average defensive player, instead of being at 0.9 WAR, he would have been at 3.1 WAR, which would make him, I think, the 3rd best player on the team this year. Right? Because you have Singer at 4.5, and then Michael A. Taylor at 3.2. Almost entirely on the back of his defense. Scott Barlow was 3rd this year. It's usually not a good sign when your closer is one of your 3 best players, when you didn't have like a Wade Davis type season. Really, the best way to sum up the Royals is that they had 8 guys on the entire roster that had more than 1 WAR. On this top 12, you didn't get to number 12. Number 12 was Yoel Payamps, who
right.
was, I think, just flat out released by the Royals, which kind of surprising. He was pitching fairly well, but that's not a great sign when a nondescript middle reliever makes the photo page of one of your top 12 players. So, but Bobby Witt, I do think his defense was bad, but I do think some of those defensive metrics have to regress a little bit. If he's, instead of negative 22, if he's a negative 10, that would still be a bad defensive player. He'll pick up, over a win's worth of value right there. I think between defensive regression and just natural offensive development, given his age, I don't think he needs to necessarily have more power, more speed. But if he can just draw a few more walks, get the average up, get his OBP up 20, 25 points, he'll be a 3 to 3.5 win player. And that'll probably make him a top 3 guy in this organization.
I'll go fiction. And I'll give you a reason why. When you look at his, and it's very early in his career, player comps on Baseball Reference.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get excited? Have you looked at them?
Well, I'm looking at them right now. So the key, of course, is to look at the player comps at the same age, right? The number 1 is quite interesting.
Go ahead.
Omar Infante. Okay.
Omar Infante.
Yes, Omar Infante. But before you freak out, Omar Infante at the same age in 2004, I remember because I had him on a fantasy team, had a very promising, season when he was a 22.
He's Omar Infante.
Okay.
He was booed out of the city.
Yeah, because they signed him to a free agent deal. Why did they give him a 4-year deal? Because when they signed him, he was a good player. He actually had a decent career for 6 or 7 years before the Royals. Actually, it was almost 10 years before the Royals signed him. He, 9 years after his age 22 season, he was having a good year for the Detroit Tigers. So Omar Infante, there are worse things in the world than to end up like Omar Infante. But look at the second guy on the list. I don't know if you remember Dick McAuliffe. Dick McAuliffe was the starting second baseman for the 1968 Detroit Tigers, and was one of the more underrated players of the 1960s. Finished with 38 WAR.
Can I point out the flaw in what you said? I don't know if you remember Dick McAuliffe.
It was 50 years ago, dude.
Yeah, but that's my point. He's comped to a guy that your lead sentence is, I don't know if you remember this guy.
But he was an incredible player. Let me finish the point. Like Dick McAuliffe was a really good player. Asdrubal Cabrera, who's third on the list, was a good player. These were not superstars. But like, I don't look at these lists. This list doesn't fill me with foreboding. I mean, number 5 on the list is Tony Lazzeri, who's in the Hall of Fame, part of the Murderers Row 27 Yankees. I mean, there are some. It's not like these are all complete bums. And I'm saying that even though Bobby Witt had, a season which on certain metrics was a little disappointing, and yet he still has some really good comps on his list.
None of them are bums. I agree, and probably Lazzeri's isn't he? He'd be the best guy on this list. I think
probably. So,
yeah. My point simply is, in making this prediction, is he going to be the list? At some point, the Royals have to hit on some of these draft picks, right? And if what you have is Asdrubal Cabrera with the number overall 2 pick on a guy that was said to be, a can't miss prospect, that's not enough, right? Like that doesn't get it done.
Let me give one more reason to defend Bobby Witt, which is when you look at the similarity scores Baseball Reference is using. What the way the formula works is they simply take a player's raw numbers. It's not adjusted for ballpark or league context, anything like that. And the American League of 2022 is a much harder offensive era than, for instance, Asdrubal Cabrera on this list. Well, Asdrubal Cabrera is coming on this list from 2008. In 2008, the American League OPS as a whole was 756. All right, I'm looking up this year. The American League this year was 701. So he's being compared to a player who was in a much more favorable offensive context. So that's something that, so that's actually not a fair comparison for Bobby Witt. Like if you adjusted for context, Asdrubal Cabrera would not be on the list. It would probably be a much better.
It is fair because 2 years ago, because we're going to get to something about we'll see where we are time wise. Maybe we'll do it later. We seem to yap for quite some time. The offensive numbers were significantly higher 3 years ago. So to say oh no, the times have changed, it's different. That's not fair. Give it 10 minutes and it will be.
Yeah,
the baseball, the new
but if they are, Bobby Witt will be better. Bobby Witt didn't do this 3 years ago. He did it this year when things are, next year when they've eliminated, shifts and they've put in all these new rule changes, offensive levels may go up quite a bit. But guess what? Bobby Witt numbers might go up too.
Yeah, but they'll go up relative to history, he's not going to go up relative to the people around him because everybody's going to benefit from those things.
That's my point. He's already better relative to the players around him than Asdrubal Cabrera was. Here, Asdrubal Cabrera. You're really making me defend Asdrubal Cabrera now.
I've looked at I looked at his numbers.
Okay, Asdrubal Cabrera, the same year that this comp. Here, let me use OPS plus because OPS plus is adjusted for ballpark and league fights. So Asdrubal Cabrera, the year that they are close comps, had a 92 OPS plus. Bobby Witt had a 102 OPS plus. That's 10 points is a fairly sizable difference.
It is.
And I'm saying Asdrubal Cabrera wasn't a bad player. If he's 10% better than Asdrubal Cabrera for his career, that's a 35-win player, 40-win player for his career. Not a Hall of Famer. Maybe slightly disappointing, but a guy certainly in the early part of his career is going to probably be very valuable for the next 5 years.
I just think context needs to be. I think the Royals do themselves a disservice, and the industry did it. When you're picking second, this is part of the problem. You're counting on an all-star, right? That's what you're supposed to get when you pick up that high. So it's inevitable. Pressure comes with it. I just think some people need to maybe reset their expectations.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, Bobby Witt, the second pick of the draft. Would you rather the Royals have taken the third pick in the draft that year, who was Andrew Vaughn?
We've gone
fourth pick, J.J. Bleday. Fifth pick, Riley Green. I mean, he was with the Tigers this year, and actually, was a good rookie. But I don't think, looking at this list, I don't think the Royals have made a mistake by taking Bobby Witt number 2. The only guy in that first round who's really gone forward beyond where Bobby Witt was, where Bobby Witt is today, would be probably Alek Manoah, the Blue Jays took, and is a number 1 starter. Of course, the Royals had drafted Alek Manoah. He'd probably have a 5.5 ERA right now. So I don't think the Royals have made a mistake.
Yeah, no. I listen. My point is this, though. They at some point they've got to hit on some difference makers, right? And Bobby Witt Jr. is supposed to be one of them.
Absolutely.
And so when I put it out there, I mean, really all I wanted to say was 10th in WAR, and got a long way to go to get up there to be
Yeah,
an impact guy.
absolutely.
Definitely
But
is
all of that is not all. Most of that is his defense, and I mean, this is a bet that he will not be as bad defensively next year as he was this year. In part because if he is, frankly, at some point they have to consider changing positions and moving him to the outfield or doing something, because you cannot play a -22 defender um, and develop a pitching staff.
Yes, and I will say that speaks to their inability to identify what they have until he comes up and hits 1,500 at bats and fields 5,000 balls, and suddenly they go, oh, this is what he is. That's got to change. They've got to figure this stuff out faster and be able to put the team together. Scott Barlow, let's go fact or fiction on Scott
Mm-hmm.
Barlow will be the best reliever in the bullpen next year.
See, I'm going to say fiction on this one, and I mean for the very simple reason that relievers are very unpredictable. And I mean, he's been arguably the best or close to the best reliever in the bullpen, certainly for the last 2 years. But his ERA this year was 2.18. His FIP was 3.62. He, was a good reliever who I think pitched in some good luck, and that's one of the reasons why I really thought the Royals should have taken advantage of his value and traded him for a pretty sizable prospect haul. I think they could have gotten to the trade deadline. But also, to me, that is me saying fiction is a bit of a bet on Dylan Coleman, who I think really is the most promising reliever in that bullpen, and who had some control issues this year because every freaking player on the entire team except for Zack Greinke and Brady Singer couldn't throw strikes this year, but was still very, very effective. And I think with a new pitching organization structure, I think Dylan Coleman will advance with his command. And there's also the dark horse, which is if Josh Stillmont is healthy, because one of the less publicized mistakes the Royals made this year was the way they handled Stillmont, and he was allowed to pitch when he really wasn't healthy, and it showed. But when he was healthy 2 years ago, he had as good a stuff as anybody in the organization.
And I'll say fiction for the reason you said, the variance of relievers from year to year, other than the truly elite, is all over the place. And I see a guy who's a very good reliever this year, but I don't see, this is not Wade Davis in the eighth right now. That's not what he is. And I'll tell you this, something else. And I've got Matt's back 1,000,000%. I would have traded him at the deadline.
We both would have.
Hopeful to get something. You got to get something for him, right? But if they're going to bring in a new regime, let's get at it. Okay, Scott Barlow should not be your best reliever because there are 15K per nine guys everywhere in baseball. Okay, 13 plus K per nine guys, 2, 3, 4 of them on every team. If he is, you're slow to get out of the gates with the new regime. That is a reason why I say fiction, and I'm hoping it is fiction. More so that somebody's better than Barlow gets better, or they acquire better, they develop better, and it's not because Barlow's not that good, right? I'd be thrilled to have same Scott Barlow. I just expect them to be able to get better. I'm going to bank on the fact that they're going to do a better job of developing other arms that maybe have more high-end talent. Fact or fiction, Vinnie Pasquantino will be a top 20 hitter in all of baseball next year.
Well, you know how I feel about Vinnie Pasquantino. You know my answer to this question even before we get started. Yes, he will be. In part because he almost was this year. I'm looking it up here. His OPS plus this year was 135. And among batters with 300 or more plate appearances, that would have put him around 28th. So he doesn't even have to get that much better, and that includes a first 6 weeks adjustment period to the major leagues where he was a below average hitter. I mean, his OPS plus from like August 1st on was like almost 160, which is absolutely elite. But I keep coming back to power and contact. Power without strikeouts. It feels like you're cheating somehow. That should not be possible. And the number of players who can do that is very, very, very small. Throw in the fact that they're getting, they're banning the shift next year, and left-handed hitters are going to benefit far more than right-handed hitters because left-handed hitters are the ones who have, suffered as a result of the shift. I think MJ Melendez will probably benefit even more, but Vinnie Pasquantino hit a lot of balls to deep second base, to, short right field, that were turned into outs. And I think eliminating the shift, he's going to help his average. And I think he's a 25 home run a year guy. And I think he is going to be, yes, one of the 20 best. We're not talking about just overall value because of his defensive, position. And he's not a great defender and he's playing first base. But purely as a hitter, purely in the batter's box, yes, I think he's a top 20 hitter in all of baseball next year.
I'm sold on all of the data you have thrown at me. And with the Royals' new movement towards data, I'm going to trust in the data. And the numbers that are there are fantastic. I think he's got the right approach. I love his personality. I think if he has a slump, he doesn't fold the tent. We saw him come up and really have a slump to start, where he was hitting balls hard, but just wasn't having any luck. So I think you've got the right mental approach. I think the only thing is he going to have the durability to play 150 plus games for the Royals and perhaps play at first base if necessary. So I'm going to basically I'm trusting in Rany. And I like what I see.
Trust in Vinnie. Just trust in Vinnie. He's
but
I don't know. Though my only worry is I don't know how he does it. Like I don't know how he is such an elite contact guy. I mean, he has a strikeout rate that Nicky Lopez would be jealous of, and yet, he's gripping it and ripping it, and it's just that should not be possible. But he's done it for too long at too many different levels for me to doubt him now.
Top 20 is rarefied air, though.
It is, and that's why I think it's an ambitious thing to say. And the Royals have had very few top 20 hitters. I mean, they've had top 20 players because of the value of the defense. Lorenzo Cain, was third in the league in MVP voting. But I'm trying to think the last time they had a truly top 20 hitting talent. I mean, even Billy Butler at his best probably wasn't up there. I actually probably should look back at that to see who was the last Royals player to be a top 20 hitter. I mean, there were guys who should have been. Eric Hosmer, we kept thinking should have been. Alex Gordon was a top 20 player because of his defense, but
might be
really have to go back a while. Yeah, probably. We might have to go all the way back to Sweeney to find somebody. And I actually think Sweeney is a pretty good comp for the kind of value that Vinnie Pasquantino will be. Sweeney had the misfortune of playing for a team that was so bad that I think a lot of the fans projected some of their failures on him. And I hope that doesn't happen to Vinny.
Listen, I took post-game calls where Mike Sweeney had a solo home run and a sacrifice fly, and the Royals lost 3-2. And Sweeney hit a deep fly ball to the track with a man on base, and I would take a call that Sweeney's not clutch.
My favorite,
the only guy to strike the baseball that night, and the conclusion was, well, Sweeney's he's got to deliver. He's making $11 million a year. It was ridiculous.
My favorite anecdote about Mike Sweeney and clutch or lack of clutch. I'm looking up the date here. Oh, here we go. Yep. I found a video. Never mind. August 14th, 2002. Mike Sweeney, in a one-run game against the New York Yankees, stole home.
Yeah.
He tied, and it was a one. The Royals were losing by a run. Mike Sweeney stole home. Not one of these double steal delayed. It was a straight steal of home to tie a game against the Yankees.
Yeah.
The Royals lost the game in extra innings. And to me, that tells you everything you need to know about Mike Sweeney, that the Royals didn't deserve him. Like, he was not just a freakishly good hitter, but he was very clutch. And he was just playing for a team that was so bad it never mattered. And it was very frustrating, like you said, the discourse at that time. I'd like to think that the media and certainly the fans, I think, are a little more sophisticated about that stuff now than they used to be, and don't blame players who are on bad teams for being on a bad team. I don't think people look at Mike Trout and say he's a loser because the Angels are run by incompetent morons. 20 years ago, that might have been the case. But I think Vinnie Pasquantino could be that level of a player for the Royals.
Yes, and I would agree, and I think that would be great for the organization. By the way, he also was willing, and I forget which one it was. I think Jeff willing to go out and try to punch Jeff Weaver in the face.
Not willing to, he did.
He did, and it was something that needed to be done by somebody in baseball for a long time, and Mike Sweeney took it upon himself to do it. That was a fun night at the K. I actually had driven home from River Falls that day I was at Chiefs training camp all week, and that was a Friday, and I ducked out early. I can't remember how it was, anyway, maybe it was Saturday. I can't remember what. I thought it was a Friday. I don't know how I would have gotten. It's only about a 5-hour drive when I drive it, but I got to the stadium a little bit late, and I was there, and I had a couple of beers with my boss at the time, great guy Brian Wilson, and all of a sudden this fight breaks out, and he's like, "Well, put down the beer because you're going in there tonight. You got to ask questions on what's going on." And so
What I remember most about that, my brother actually was at the stadium that day. My brother did a medical rotation in Kansas City for a month, and happened to be at Kauffman Stadium, and calls me, and like he was so delirious I could barely understand what he was saying. He was so excited that Mike Sweeney had gone out and decked Jeff Weaver in the face, and I couldn't believe it. Mike Sweeney, the nicest guy in baseball.
Yeah.
What on earth did Jeff Weaver? Well, there's talk about what Jeff Weaver may have done or said to provoke it.
I might still have the recording.
But when I heard it, I'm like, well, whatever it was, Jeff Weaver must have deserved it or done something. Mike Sweeney's not going out there and punch it. And Mike Sweeney's, was suspended for 15 games and apologized. And, I'm sure to this day he will say he's sorry, but I'm gonna take Mike's side on Mike Sweeney was a pacifist. If he's going out there and hitting somebody, then
Mike Sweeney afterwards said, it was funny. I'm going to say, because we're on a podcast, this is exactly how he edited himself. Weaver had thrown at him or hit him the last at bat or something and brought it in tight. And Sweeney looked out at him and he goes, I said this, what's your problem or whatever. And then he dropped an effing pussy on me. And that was it. And he went out having Sweeney edit part of it, but not all of it. That night, as we stood around his locker stall, was quite entertaining. We need to get Mike on and talk about that night. Also, Kyle Farnsworth was on a mission to beat the hell out of Jeremy Offeld as all that was going on the field too. That was an interesting one. And then Kyle Farnsworth, I would interview about that night when he became a Royal at spring training. That was some fun stuff. All right, I do want to get Matt wanted you to talk about what is your measurement for top. What are you going to call for top 20? How are we measuring this?
Well, we're looking just at their at the
he comes in 22
so we're talking about
some kind of relative metric. I'm going to give you.
I'm going to say OPS plus is really what I'm looking at, because again, from a WAR perspective, no, he has no defensive value relative to
so OPS
Betster or something, but OPS plus, and we're not talking about stolen bases. We're just talking about what he can do with a bat in his hands.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
And I assume then that some people in the comments, somebody's keeping track of all of these. Bets, and we're going to find out.
I'm keeping track of what you and I.
Okay. Well, then I need people in the comment section to keep you honest and also keep track too. So
I'll send it to you. I'll text it over. You get the copy. It's on a note. I'm not a liar. I would hope I've at least survived.
You've been asking me Final Four questions for the last 20 years, and I still have no idea how I do on those. So.
I have every notebook. If you want to know every Final Four I've ever asked since I've been at WHB, I have the answer. I can go back and look it up. Maybe I'll get an intern one year to compile every Final Four onto a spreadsheet. All right, let's go with this one. The Royals will have a top half of baseball offense. By that, I mean top 15 or better. For the record, they were 24th this year with 640 runs scored. I'm doing it by runs scored. 15th was a tie, 15 and 16. Cleveland and Colorado scored 698 runs. It's not that far away. It's going from 24th to 15th. The Royals will have a top 15 off. We're all excited about all these young bats. Everybody, are they ready to produce, Rany?
You may be surprised by my answer, but I'm actually going to say fiction. I think jumping that high, I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot, but 60 runs is a big amount of improvement. And I think with young players, there are going to be some big breakouts. There's going to be some regression. Some of the guys that we think might be solutions might not be. I think it's going to take 2 years. I think if you ask me in 2024, I would say fact. That would be my argument, that the Royals offensively may take a small, and not necessarily a step backwards next year, but they may not improve dramatically this coming year. I think the improvement, if there is some, is going to be on the pitching side. But I will say fiction and hope that I'm wrong.
By the way, Cam, I like this one. Sir, and I recall you having me compile some spreadsheets when I interned. Cam's a former intern. Yes, and he also pointed out I usually grabbed your Diet Coke cans, though. So there you go.
You mean you can have an intern grab Diet Coke cans? I need to find one.
I would say I will send the interns, not all the time, but I will send them out for lunch or sodas under the pretext of if you fly, I buy. And they have to get something. If they're like, I don't want anything, then I don't send them. I'm like, you have to get something out of this deal. That's my thing. So I'd like, hopefully Cameron won't go, not me. Blown up. That's what I do today. It's been a little while since Cam was an intern. So, we'll see, what he says if he goes ridiculous. I'll go fiction on that as well. I don't see Salvador Perez staying healthy long enough. I don't see Bobby Witt Jr. moving into the top 3 in WAR. I think it's a lot on Vinny. Waters. Like I'm not even sure what this roster is going to be. I think there may be a step back to take 2 steps forward, which I would love. I would love if they would come in and shuffle the deck. And JJ's like moving some young guys, and he says, we find out through different ways, that hey, what JJ's deal was that he didn't believe in this guy and he didn't believe in that guy. It would show that he's got a different opinion than how Dayton Moore was doing things. And I think that may bring their numbers down. So I'll say fiction as well, but I won't fall out of my chair if they get there. And frankly, they need to get to top 10. So we're just talking about top 15, but I won't fall out of my chair if they get there.
Well, you brought up a good point, and I hate to spring another factor fiction on you, but let me throw one in because we've touched on this before. Factor fiction: the Royals will make a trade this offseason in which they trade away a young hitter for pitching. The trade that hurts that we've talked about. Like, the Royals will do something significant and trade one of the promising guys that they have because they think they can get better value somewhere else.
I'm going to say fiction. And I'll add it to the list here. I'll say fiction because I think the new manager is going to come in and want to see what he has. And because these are JJ Piccola's babies too, right? He was part of the scouting and the development and all that. And I think, that's the scary part of staying the course with JJ Piccolo. And if he does, I'll be thrilled because I think it'll be a man who has a vision and he's not afraid to make it happen. But I think that there will be a let's see what we have kind of approach. It was a bad year. We don't want to throw anything out and have somebody blow up someplace else. A second bad year, then we're free to move guys, which will be a mistake, right? So, but I'll say fiction. What will you say?
I think fiction too. I think next year, next offseason, that's when you make the trade that hurts. That's the way the Royals are going to look at it. And I do, I'm sympathetic to the view, if this is Piccolo's view, that you're bringing in a new manager, you're going to bring in a new pitching coach. Like you want to put the talent that you do have in a position to succeed before you make decisions that you may regret. Like I think it would be fascinating if they traded one of their young hitters. I would be terrified if they traded one of their young pitchers that they're selling low. Like if the Royals announced that they were trading Jackson Kowar, you know what I mean, and getting, I don't know, a slightly highly rated A-ball prospect or whatever, I'd be terrified because I'm like, if another organization wants Jackson Kowar, they probably think they can fix him. And given what the Royals were doing for him last year, that there's a good chance that organization would be right. So I'd like to see them try to fix what they have with new development personnel first. So I think the time is probably not right, but frankly, I think they should have been giving this a lot of consideration a year ago because, we've talked about this, the MJ Melendez conundrum. What is he? He may be a good hitter, but is he a catcher? Is he a left fielder? Like, what do you do with a guy like that? If they had traded Nick Pratto 6 months ago, I think his trade value would have been a lot higher than it is today. So, I think right now there's so much flux with the hitters and the pitchers that I'm sympathetic to waiting and seeing what a new development organization will do for them. But I don't think it'll happen this year. I think we're going to see something big next year.
Okay. The Royals will sign Brady Singer to a 5+ year contract extension.
I'm going to say fact. I think if there's one dramatic thing they do, and partly it's okay, Brady Singer, I think, has earned it. I think this is the right time. I also do think that Brady Singer, for as much grief as we given, Cal Eldred and the whole pitching side. He's obviously the one success. And I think that Brady Singer sort of vibes with the organizational ethos. They drafted him in part because they like him as a person as much as they liked him as a pitcher. And while that has not gone well for the Royals in other situations, this is the rare example of a guy they drafted for some of the off-field stuff that they have been vindicated on. And I feel like they would be absolutely thrilled, having been proven right on him, to get him signed to a long-term deal. And I think he values what the organization's belief in him, and I think he'd be more amenable to it than a guy like Bobby Witt right now. So it's a a high risk proposition, but I'm gonna say fact.
Yeah, I like it. I am going to say fact as well, and I thought for sure I was going to be the only one. I thought you would play the math as you are so wanting to do, and I would prefer to do, but I wanted to be bold and daring. I've got one more that I think is going to be, kind of fun coming up. But I'll say fact because I think that they have to make a statement, and I think this would be a great statement to make, and is a good baseball decision. Brady Singer Frank, I don't mean to be rude about this, but they have developed nothing for pitching, and this guy has made it. I mean, that's a resiliency, that's a toughness, that's ability, and so yes, I say they do it because they have to put their flag in the ground and start showing the fan base that, wow, the payroll is going to go down. We're going to keep our best players, and I think it'd be a really smart move, both baseball wise and in the court of public opinion wise as well. So I will go fact on that. Here we go. Asa Lacy will pitch in the big leagues in 2023. Fact or fiction, Randy?
This is certainly a ballsy one to put on the list. I did not expect this one when you sent that out. I'm still gonna go with chalk here, man, and say fiction, because frankly the one scenario in which I could see him pitching in the majors next year is actually a scenario in which the Royals are in contention. Because even if they fix his command issues, they're probably going to want to take it slow with him and give him a full season of success with an eye towards 2024. But if they're in a situation where they're in contention and he's throwing strikes and he's throwing 99 with dazzling secondary stuff in the minors, then yes, they'll call him up to be in that bullpen as a weapon, as a potential Andrew Miller, Josh Hader type we've talked about, like that role for him in October. But if the Royals aren't in contention, even if he gets straightened out, I think they're going to be conservative with him. And of course, there's no guarantee that anybody's going to straighten him out. So I'm going to say fiction.
I am going to go fact. I didn't put it on.
I didn't think you put it on the list unless you were.
I didn't put it on the list to go obviously no. Although I think it would have had comedic value if I did that. Like, no, what idiot would put that there? I'm going to go fact for pretty much the reason you mapped out. Like, I think and can Asa Lacy, Vinnie asked this question, can he go full Rick Ankiel? I don't know if he can play center field. Okay, but the pitching part, yes. Guys, bail, are lost because of the yips all the time, every year. Somebody in multiple guys every year that happens to. So yes, it's terrifying. The Royals should be absolutely terrified right now. But I believe that the plan has to be to go get the best pitching people around. He had immense talent. I'm going to bank on the fact that they can fix whatever the problem was. And I think the scenario you painted, he's throwing lights out and they want to have a little success and they want to reward the guy and give him the carrot of what's available. And you see him up in September of next year in a reliever role. And that may very well be his role.
Of all the questions that we're throwing out fact or fiction, if there's one that I could choose to be fact, this might be the one I would pick. Like I think it might mean more to this organization in the long term if you are right and Asa Lacy actually makes it to the majors next year, than almost anything else here. Because, it took Kyle Zimmer. Kyle Zimmer was probably maybe the last pitcher in a similar position with Asa Lacy, where a top 5 draft pick that, early on showed signs that he wasn't going to be it wasn't going to be fast tracked to the majors. He was supposed to be fast tracked and he wasn't. And obviously with him, a lot of it was injury concerns. But I mean, Asa Lacy, they blame his, back issues for his command falling apart this year. And you almost have to hope that was part of it. And Kyle Zimmer, yeah, he got there. It took like 7 years. So if Asa Lacy makes it to the majors next year, then that restores him as a potential top prospect. And where he is now to where that would put him, that's a huge, huge development. So I would root for that more than almost anything else we're talking about.
All right, let's go with this for our final one. Zack Greinke returns to the Royals next season. Fact or fiction?
Maybe the fan in me, I'm going to say fact. In part because Ann Rogers, who is the Royals reporter for Royals.com and actually works, for the organization, and so has some insight into,
or at least for Major League Baseball.
For Major League Baseball, right? She's
she's part of the corporate machine.
Exactly. I'm not going to say she speaks on behalf of the team, but certainly the insight that she gives is going to be filtered through the organization, and that's completely to be expected, and that's fine. But when she writes in her weekly newsletter that, quote, sources have indicated the Royals will be looking for 2 starters. One could be Zack Greinke if he wants to return, and the Royals believe he does, at least right now. Well, that's a more optimistic sentiment than I was expecting. So I think what that tells me is the Royals would like to have him back. That's the one thing I can definitely see from that. So it really just comes down to, does Zack want to return? And, for as disappointing a season as it was, and for Zack, it must have been deja vu that here he is on another Royals team that isn't going anywhere. The fact that, he seemed content in a way that he wasn't content his last time around. I mean, it's been 12 years since he had been in Kansas City. He has 3 children who were not born then. And I do think he's in a completely different stage of, not just of his career, but of his life. And if his wife and children were happy in Kansas City, and, it's not just a cliche to say Kansas City is a great place to raise a family. I think for a lot of athletes, it really is true. And you hear that from a lot of athletes who have young children, that Kansas City has an appeal that, the 22-year-old, hellraiser who wants to shut down every bar might not agree with that. But Zack Greinke, he's a 39-year-old with a wife and 3 kids. There was no evidence he wanted to be traded at the trading deadline. I mean, if he had wanted to, the Royals probably could have moved him and gotten something. So, and I think the fact that the Royals are aggressively trying to correct the mistakes of this year by firing their president, their manager, their pitching coach, that might be enough for Zack to say, yes, they're trying, and he enjoys the mentorship role. The players seem to really like having him there. I'm going to say fact. I think I'm hoping here, but I really do think he'll be back for one more season.
He did not come back here. Zack is a bright guy. He's aloof. He's different, but he is a bright guy. And he didn't come back here thinking that they were headed to the playoffs. Like, not for 1 second. He came back here for something else. One, money. Let's not discount they gave him $13 million. That's part of the equation there. Definitely money. But also, I think he remembered what the environment was. And he's been in the pressure cooker. That was Houston. Been in L.A., which I am very proud to say. I remember people saying, no way he could play in a big market. And I'm like, nobody's better suited for the big market because he doesn't care anyway. Like, what does it matter if 40 guys are asking him a question he doesn't want to answer? And he's not going to answer it. He does a quick media session. He's done. He doesn't talk to anybody. There's no getting in with Zack Greinke. It's not happening. So it really doesn't matter. But I think he did. There was clearly something about his time in Kansas City that appealed to him. And you mentioned the family part. I think that this place appealed to him. And so for that reason, I think that he will probably, I'm not going to say he'll finish his career here because I can see a scenario where he would get traded and say, okay, that's a place I would go. I would go there. I would do that. But I think he will be back. I think if he wants to pitch, this is a good place to come back. Is it a lock? Is it 100%? No. But I think it's fact. I think Zack Greinke came here for a reason, and whatever that reason is, it wasn't to contend. And so I don't think that changes the calculus on what he's trying to figure out this offseason. If the Royals number is going to be near anybody else's number, and they've got it, and I don't know what other veteran pitcher that can pitch as well as he can would come here. And would come here on a 1-year deal, or maybe he asked for a 2-year deal. Who would do it? I can't
Yeah,
name
no,
it.
he quietly. I mean, the success of the team obscured it, but he quietly had a pretty good season.
Yeah.
I mean, what it was 111 ERA plus, and I think what we said he was sixth on the team, 2.5 WAR. I mean, 2.5 WAR. Take a look at free agent signings every year. How many of them actually give their team 2.5 WAR? In the first year of their contract, you're not getting a guy like that. Certainly not for like less than $15 to $20 million typically. So even I'm guessing he won't get 13 million, but he'll probably get close to it, 10, 11 million. And frankly, if he can deliver the same level of performance next year with presumably a better defense behind him, because that's the thing, he's much more reliant on his defense than a pitcher with a higher strikeout rate. And if the Royals give him a better defensive support, I think he could easily replicate what he did this year. I think it's win-win for both sides.
Let's leave you with this. Matt says Zack Greinke doing a Peyton Manning-like podcast when he retires might be the greatest thing ever. Will never happen, but we can only hope. I am happy to co-host, produce, sell, do anything I can to be a part of that podcast.
I'll be the third man on there.
Yes,
Happy to join him.
Whatever it takes. My Jim Harbaugh and Zack Greinke, two of my favorite guys to interview because you don't know what's coming. You don't know how long a pause. You don't know where they might go. Absolutely. Sign me up for the Zack Greinke Experience podcast. If he wants to do it, I'm here for you, Zach. I'll help you make it happen. That's going to do it for us. We appreciate everybody joining us. Remember, if you're catching us via the podcast, you can be a part of the conversation. We've got all the folks, Cam, Matt, Curtis, Tony, a lot of the regs in here tonight. Christopher, let's see who else we got in here. I don't want to miss anybody. Vinny chimed in a couple of times. Kellen, going through some of the names. We appreciate everybody being a part of the conversation. You can do that via the Twitch, the Facebook, and the YouTube. And, of course, wherever you get your podcast. You can get the podcast if you're new on the stream and don't know about the podcast. You can download it there as well. Or you can go to my website, sorenpetro.com. That'll take you where you need to go. So for the good Dr. Rany Jazayerli, we have our fact and fiction. We will keep the scorecard. We'll see how it goes as we get around to next year. We'll check back on it. We'll probably play fact or fiction a couple more times during the offseason. But for the good Dr. Rany Jazayerli, my name is Soren Petro. You can catch my work at 810WHB.com. Thank you very much for joining us here on Kaufman Corner.